You finally set the boundary you knew you needed. And instead of feeling strong, you feel guilty. You stop reaching out to someone who keeps hurting you, and suddenly you miss them more than you expected. You take a day to rest, and somehow doing nothing feels more uncomfortable than exhausting yourself. You finally say no. Then spend the next hour wondering if you should take it back. This is one of the strangest parts of changing your life. Sometimes doing what's good for you doesn't feel good at all. In fact, it can feel so wrong that you start wondering whether going back would be easier. So why does a healthier choice sometimes create more discomfort before it creates more peace? And if you like psychology that helps you understand what's happening beneath your thoughts, emotions, and behavior, subscribe. That's exactly what we explore here. We tend to assume our emotions are giving us instructions. If you feel guilty after saying no, maybe you were selfish. If you feel anxious after making a decision, maybe you made the wrong one. If you miss someone after walking away, maybe you were supposed to stay. The emotion is real, so the conclusion feels real too. But those are two different things. A feeling can be completely real without being an instruction you have to follow. Your mind doesn't react only to what is objectively good or bad for you. It also reacts to what is familiar and unfamiliar. And those categories don't always match. Something unhealthy can feel strangely comfortable because you've experienced it 1,000 times. Something healthy can feel threatening simply because you haven't. Imagine someone who has spent years keeping everyone happy. They've learned to notice what other people need before asking what they need. They answer quickly. They help. They accommodate. They avoid disappointing people whenever possible. Then one day they finally set a reasonable boundary. Nothing terrible happened. Nobody is in danger. The boundary may even be exactly what they needed. But inside something feels wrong. What? Because they didn't just change a behavior. They violated an identity. Maybe somewhere along the way they learned, I'm the helpful one. I'm the easygoing one. I'm the person who doesn't cause problems. I'm always available. I don't disappoint people. And once a role becomes part of how you understand yourself, behaving differently can create emotional friction. A boundary can feel selfish when your identity was built around being endlessly available. Rest can feel irresponsible when you learn to connect your worth with productivity. Walking away can feel cruel when you learn that loving someone means staying no matter what. Speaking honestly can feel aggressive when you've spent years keeping the peace by staying silent. Sometimes growth feels wrong because it conflicts with the person you learned you had to be. And then something else happens. Other people notice. Psychological patterns don't exist only inside you. They become part of relationships. If you've always said yes, people may begin expecting yes. If you've always solved everyone's problems, they may begin expecting you to rescue them. If you've always answered immediately, your availability becomes normal. So when you change, the relationship has to adjust too. You say no. Someone seems disappointed. You feel guilty. And your mind immediately says, see? I shouldn't have done that. But someone else's disappointment is not automatic proof that you've done something wrong. Sometimes it's simply evidence that something familiar has changed. That doesn't make the other person bad either. They may be adjusting to the new pattern just like you are. The important question is whether you interpret every uncomfortable reaction as a command to become your old self again. Because that creates a powerful loop. You change. Someone reacts. You become uncomfortable. Then you reverse the change to make the discomfort disappear. And the moment you go back, you feel relief. That relief can be misleading. It can convince you that the old behavior was correct when what actually happened is much simpler. You return to something familiar. Think of an old room you've lived in for years. Maybe you don't even like the room. The chair is uncomfortable. The window barely opens. There's a floorboard that makes noise every time you walk across it. But you know that room. You can walk through it in the dark. You know where everything is. Now imagine being placed in a completely different room. It's brighter. There's more space. The window opens. It may objectively be better. But tonight, when the lights go out, you don't know where anything is. That's what change can feel like. The old pattern no longer fits you, but the new one doesn't feel natural yet. You're between familiarity and freedom. And this is where people often return to things they've already decided to leave. Not necessarily because the old relationship became healthy. Not because people-pleasing suddenly became good for them. Not because overworking became sustainable. But because familiarity can impersonate safety. If you've ever made a healthy change and then felt a strange urge to undo it, tell me in the comments what that change was. And if this is helping you understand your discomfort differently, give the video a like. It helps more people find these conversations. Now there's an important distinction here. Not every uncomfortable feeling is something you should push through. Fear can sometimes be warning you about real danger. Guilt can sometimes appear because you've genuinely acted against your values. Discomfort can reveal that a situation isn't right for you. So the lesson isn't to ignore your feelings. And it definitely isn't that pain automatically means growth. The better question is, what kind of discomfort am I experiencing? There are 3 questions that can help. First, does this choice violate my values or only my old habits? Suppose you said no respectfully because you're exhausted. The guilt that follows doesn't necessarily mean the boundary was wrong. Maybe saying no simply violates an old habit of always being available. But if you lied, manipulated someone, or acted against something you genuinely value, that discomfort deserves a different kind of attention. Second, is something actually unsafe, or am I experiencing uncertainty, guilt, loneliness, or fear? Those emotions matter. But loneliness is not the same thing as danger. Uncertainty is not the same thing as danger. Someone being disappointed with you is not automatically danger. Learning to name what you're actually experiencing can stop one emotion from becoming a verdict on your entire decision. And third, if I practice this behavior consistently for 6 months, who would I be becoming? This question moves you beyond immediate relief. If you practice saying reasonable no's for 6 months, would you become cruel, or would you become someone with clearer boundaries? If you rested when your body needed rest, would you become lazy or more sustainable? If you stopped chasing people who repeatedly gave you uncertainty, would you become cold or more selective about where you invest yourself? The goal isn't to find an excuse to do whatever you want. It's to investigate discomfort before allowing it to make the decision for you. And there's a small experiment you can try the next time this happens. When you make a healthy decision and immediately feel the urge to reverse it, don't rush to make the feeling disappear. Give it some space. Notice what you're feeling. Name it: guilt, loneliness, fear, uncertainty. Then ask, what familiar behavior is this emotion trying to pull me back toward? Maybe you want to apologize for a perfectly reasonable boundary. Maybe you want to send another message because silence feels unbearable. Maybe you want to say yes because someone's disappointment is difficult to tolerate. Maybe you want to abandon your rest because being productive would make the guilt disappear. You don't have to decide that the emotion is wrong. Just don't automatically give it control over what happens next. When appropriate and safe, give yourself some time before reversing the decision. Because something important can happen in that space. You discover that guilt can rise and fall without you abandoning your boundary. You discover that you can miss someone without contacting them. You discover that another person can be disappointed and the relationship can survive. You discover that uncertainty can exist without requiring an immediate answer. And each time that happens, your brain receives new information. The unfamiliar begins becoming familiar. Maybe you've spent years being the fixer, the achiever, the one who stays, the one who answers, the one who keeps everyone comfortable. You don't need to hate that version of yourself. Those patterns may have helped you belong, avoid conflict, feel useful, protect yourself, or navigate an earlier chapter of your life. But something that once helped you adapt doesn't automatically deserve permanent control over your future. The old version of you may have helped you survive an earlier chapter. It doesn't have to make every decision in the next one. So think again about that boundary. The unanswered message. The day you finally rested. The person you stopped chasing. The decision you made even though part of you desperately wanted to return to what you knew. Maybe the discomfort isn't always telling you to go back. Sometimes it's what unfamiliar freedom feels like before it becomes familiar. If there's one healthy change in your life that currently feels uncomfortable, tell me what it is in the comments. And if this video gave you a different way to understand what you're feeling, leave a like. But there's another question we need to answer. How can you tell when discomfort is simply part of growth, and when it's actually warning you that something is wrong? That's what we're getting into in the video appearing on your screen now. Click it and I'll see you there.